meatballs. What is it about them that we as a species can't seem to get enough of them in our mouths? From falafel to milk duds, matzo balls to truffles, across cultures, centuries, and continents, it seems everyone is obsessed with getting food into a round shape before shoveling it into the round hole in the front of our face. Perhaps chief in this culinary category is the meatball, a melange of minced meats, often paired with a red sauce, or Sunday gravy if you will. It finds its way into many iconic foods, from baked pasta dishes to meatball subs to, of course, the Italian-American creation of spaghetti and meatballs. If, when you are endeavoring to make one of these dishes, you find yourself wandering down the frozen food aisle or the jarred sauce aisle, I implore you, please, hang with me for the next few minutes. I'm going to show you how to make meatballs and a Sunday gravy that's far better than anything in the frozen section and anything you get out of a jar. Don't believe me? Just stick around and watch. Now, a traditional meatball or Italian style meatball is going to contain beef, pork, and veal, and usually in roughly equal proportions, about a third of each. If, however, you have an aversion to eating little cute baby cows, as opposed to grown-up cows that are like 3 months older, no big deal. Okay, fine, I have some friends and loved ones that feel that way. You can definitely make a delicious meatball with just a 50-50 mix of ground beef and ground pork. If, however, you do want to use all three meats, you could definitely go to the butcher and get, a little bit of each, but I also recommend looking for what's called meatloaf or meatball mix in the ground meat section of your grocery store. It's going to contain all three, and it's already pre-ground and pre-mixed. It's a shortcut, but it doesn't really shortchange on flavor, so I'm definitely okay with it. To this, we are going to add a little less than a quarter cup of freshly chopped parsley, 2 minced garlic cloves, 1 small minced onion. I've got probably a little more than I need, so I'm just going to go in with most of that. Should be probably about a third to a half of a cup of minced onion. We're going to add about a half a cup of breadcrumbs and about a third of a cup of milk. I've got more like a half a cup here. I'm going to add about a third of a cup, and then I can always add more if I need it. 1 whole egg. And then we're going to freshly grate some Parmigiano Reggiano in there. How much cheese you put in is really up to you. I know there's recipes out there that call for like a cup of grated cheese and some that don't even call for it at all. I'm just going to go until I'm kind of satisfied. We're going to add more cheese at the end when we serve it. So last thing that we're going to add is going to be a nice heavy pinch of salt. I didn't mention I got a pound of the meatloaf, meatball mix in there. So that's how much meat we are working with. It's going to make plenty of meatballs because we've got a lot of filler here. And lastly, a nice hefty crack of freshly ground black pepper. Now all that's left to do is mix it up. So at this point, this is looking just a little wet to me. I'm gonna sprinkle in just a little bit more breadcrumbs. That looks perfect. Now you can form your balls, your meatballs that is, to any size that you like. I like to go for just smaller than a golf ball, but you're just gonna get some in your hand. That's a little too much for me. And roll it around. If the meatball does not hold its shape when you roll it, your mixture is, you got too much liquid in there, you need to add some more breadcrumbs. If it's hard to shape it into a nice round ball, it needs more liquid. So I'm gonna knock out the rest of these and we will talk about our cooking method of choice. So we're gonna be cooking our meatballs in a non-stick skillet. Non-stick skillets are awesome for when you wanna cook something and you don't want it to stick. Okay, that's obvious. A couple things though. You don't ever want to use a non-stick skillet over anything above medium-high heat. It can really damage the non-stick coating, and it can also release some pretty nasty chemicals into your food. It's not going to kill you if you do it once, but just over time it's really going to degrade the quality of the pan. So I'm going to go ahead and get our pan here over medium heat. I do want to note that my pound of meatball mixture here, with all the other added ingredients, it netted about 19 meatballs. So if you do them around that golf ball size, you should get 18 to 20, which is probably, definitely enough for 3 to 4 servings, depending on how you're using it. Are you done walking around the camera, Anubis? Yeah, appreciate that, thanks. Now, as we put these into the pan, you'll notice I'm not adding any other oil to this. This meatball, has quite a bit of fat just from the meat itself. And as they start to cook and brown, that fat will render, and we won't need any added oil to the pan at all. We're gonna brown these on one side and flip them, and I know it's kind of weird. It's a circle. It only has like no sides, but you get the picture. Brown one side, flip them, and brown the other, and then we're gonna get them into our sauce. I gotta get going on that. In a saucepan, add some olive oil, and then about 1 cup of finely minced onion. I'm gonna do this over about medium heat. We don't want any color, we just want to saute it and sweat it. We're gonna go in with about 2 to 3 cloves of minced garlic, and a good crack of fresh black pepper, and a good pinch of kosher salt. Cook that for about 8 to 10 minutes until the onions and garlic are soft, and then we're gonna add in some Italian seasoning. Only the blurriest bottles will do. I'm gonna go in there with about a tablespoon, maybe a little less, and let that heat wake up those dried herbs. Next up, bring on the tomatoes, a 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes, and rinse it with some water to get all that goodness out. Next up, about a teaspoon of balsamic vinegar and a couple of teaspoons of sugar. These help to highlight the acidic and sweet notes of the tomatoes. Since they've been in that can for a while, we want to wake them back up. Your meatball should be ready to turn at this point, and yep, when you've got that beautiful golden brown color on the bottom, it's time to get them all turned over and let them keep on cooking. Alright, so our meatballs have been browning on the second side for about 3 to 4 minutes. Now at this point, we have 2 options. Our red sauce is really done. I mean, it needs to simmer for probably 10 to 15 minutes in order to let those onions and garlic kind of soften and cook out in there and let the flavors come together. But you could take these meatballs, throw them onto a sheet tray, put them in like a 375-degree oven, and just cook them through till they were done. And if you're at all worried about the fat content in there, that may be the best way to go, as that fat is going to render out onto the tray. What I strongly recommend, however, is taking the meatballs and putting them into our red sauce, creating what is effectively a Sunday gravy. Cooking the meatballs off in the sauce is going to let all those fats and flavors mix with the red sauce, and it's going to create a more moist and tender meatball and a more flavorful sauce. That's a win-win, so that's what we're going to do. Once we get them in there, they need at least 15 minutes or so to cook through over medium heat, and at that point, they really are ready to eat. But if you can give them 45 minutes to an hour, just to sort of let them marry in the liquid in the sauce, fantastic, even better. At that point, you probably want to stop because they will start to overcook and the texture is going to get a little bit funky. Once your meatballs have cooked through, again, up to an hour in the sauce in order to really get the aromatics inside of the meatballs as tender as possible, you have a lot of options for serving. You could, of course, plate them up over some al dente spaghetti, topped with a little bit of fresh Parmesan, and you've got yourself a delicious dinner. You could alternatively mix it with some very al dente penne or rigatoni, mix in a little bit of ricotta cheese, some fresh mozzarella, put that in a big baking dish and bake it off until it's golden brown and bubbly all throughout. But my favorite way of getting the meatballs into my mouth is the second day after they're left over, making some meatball subs. For my meatball subs, I like to use one of these sandwich or hoagie rolls, but instead of splitting it down the side like most people do, I actually like to open up a little resting place for my meatballs in the top of the bread. Once I've taken out a little bit of the bread, I go in here and kind of dig out a little more with my fingers. There's plenty of bread here. It doesn't need to be too thick. Once your bread has been hollowed out, go ahead and put in 2, 3, or 4 meatballs, however many will fit right down into that nice cavity you created, and get that extra sauce in there as well. And then I like to put over a couple of slices of provolone cheese that I've torn up just so that it covers the top. I'm going to get this onto a baking sheet and get it under my broiler until the golden brown is ooey, gooey, bubbly, and delicious. Something like that. What I love about this is that it's a great way to use leftovers, which, let's be real, if you're making 20 meatballs for only a couple people, there will be leftovers. But that little bit of time under the broiler gets that cheese deliciously brown and gooey, and the bread gets nice and warm and toasted on the outside. Now, to finish this up, I recommend grating over a little more cheese because, I mean, what has cheese ever hurt? And then, because we need green things to keep us healthy, a little bit of freshly minced parsley and some torn basil. And jokes aside, this really does help to reinforce the flavors of what's inside the meatballs as well. So, only thing we can do now is go in for a taste. Okay, one important point here. When you take your golden brown, molten, lava hot sandwich out of the oven, give it a few minutes before you try and bite into it. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to taste anything for the next 3 days, but now you know, live and learn, take it from me. Let your meatball sub rest. I'm going to hang out here before I give this a second go, but I'll see you next week on Dishing Out. In the meantime, go make something delicious.